Good to see you again. Thanks very much for the nice introduction, François, because it's always a pleasure to be here with you guys of the industry. Someone told me a minute ago that we're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of IDAT, actually the 40th anniversary of your first computer also, if I understand well, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought it would be interesting today to take a bit of a longer perspective on our industry and what happened, the different shocks we had to go through, where we stand today. I'm not going to cover all of these grounds, but trying to address several topics and especially focus on the comparison, the indispensable and unavoidable comparison that we are living today with the over-the-tops. So I was going through these charts, preparing this speech today, and something became very obvious. I think it's from Forbes. You can tell that in 1917 there were already telecommunications in the world. A group like Orange goes back to 1879, actually, la Compagnie Française des Câbles Télégraphiques. So it's a very, very old route in history that we have. There are other sectors, and some of them have shrunk in an incredible way. If you look at steel, steel is probably now in the other category in 2017. There were other categories that were not there. Tech was not especially present. There was some kind of technology, obviously, but it was not considered as a full-fledged sector. And what we see going through this very long historical perspective is that some sectors have disappeared, and at least one has not disappeared. It's still there, alive and kicking, telecommunications. And it's really the introduction to my speech today. I think we're going to be there also in the next 40, 50, or 100 years. This is something that I'm pretty sure of. And at Orange, when we work with Stéphane Richard and the whole team for the group, we feel that when we invest, we prepare the next 25 to 30 years. When we roll out FTTH all around the country, in France or in several other countries too, now in Spain, in Slovakia, in Senegal also now, we do prepare the future, and a good future for all of the people we serve and also for our employees. And I'm going to go back to this. Telcos are companies with a lot of employees, and it's a strength. It's something that we're proud of and that we want to also protect for the future. We have never been in the first position as telcos, but we've always been part of the picture. And this is something absolutely determining. And when you look at the last period, 2017, you see that new companies have appeared. In the tech sector, obviously, you will find Google, Amazon, Facebook, and the others from that new category, the new giants. And obviously, the question comes, will they stay? Will they remain forever? Or should we remember this sentence from an old historical author in France saying, Jean-Baptiste Durosel, who said once, every empire shall disappear at one point or another. Again, from the very, very long historical perspective, a lot of empires have appeared and then disappeared. But looking at these companies, we see that we have been able to cope to some extent, but we have been dwarfed also to a certain extent by the new players. Again, look at those figures. I'm sure you know pretty much what those figures tell us. The 5 companies, the one with the Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, all put together, they're twice the French shareholders index, the CAC 40, more than once the French GDP, and it's 38 times the market cap of the 4 main French telcos. So look at that. You know, we have been, let's say, relatively dwarfed. When I joined this industry about 8 years ago, I felt, coming from the sector of press and media, I felt I was joining a huge industry. It is huge to some extent. The figures, the turnovers, the sales are pretty important, but the market cap has suffered quite heavily. So one of the reasons you know is that financial markets look at the perspective of hope that you deliver, the growth, what we call in the startup world the traction. And growth is relatively slow now in the telco world, in many areas around the world, actually. If we look at our own situation at Orange, the French market has suffered a lot in terms of value from the hyper-competition introduced by a new player several years ago now. We've been able now to grow again, but for some time, the turnover in France was not growing. It was decreasing. and the value of the mobile market decreased by 42% in 5 years. So it's quite a blow, you know, to any industry. Obviously, and luckily, we've been investing heavily in other geographies in which the population grows, the number of people that accept and that reach the telecommunication world to some extent is growing in Africa. We're present in 21 countries in this continent, and it helps us compensating. But again, we're facing and we are compared to others who have a traction which is incomparable. You know, 20%, 25% years of growth. So this is something that is important to bear in mind. We have revenues, for instance, which are bigger than Facebook, but their market cap is much higher. I've been able personally in the past to sell a company for a value of around 300 million euros that had never had any profits in 10 years and with a relatively low traction. But the hope was there, you know. I'm not going to tell the name of the company, but that was a good sale, actually, you know. But it was built on hope and hope of tomorrow and tomorrow being bigger and the traction and the importance of this company in order to address certain items on the internet. So with those figures, it's quite eloquent and it's quite obvious that in spite of a turnover which is huge, you are not judged exactly by the market as you should be. And this is something we've been going through for years. I mean, let's face it, you know, and we're hoping, and I'm going to try to describe you some ways in which we can hope to overcome that situation, to go beyond, and to go back to a fairer, I say, a more appreciative estimation of our value. There are other things that I wanted to share also. If you look at this, you have the impression that there is a new empire. There could be other figures here, coming from Google, for instance, or coming from Amazon, if you look at Jeff Bezos. And they're, you know, sitting on top of the world. I'm not going to compare this empire to others who sit on top of the world, like Jupiter and other mythologies, really. But, and on the other hand, you have guys that do a very, very physical job, and there are no networks without people on the ground producing the networks, servicing them, making them work in all moments of the life. And it's really a way also to show the difference between the sort of Ethereum world in which those companies live and the very, very material world, not material world in the name of Madonna, but material world in the sense of doing very, very practical things to make the networks work. And this is also an illustration of what I wanted to say. There is one sky for all of those, but there are two very, very different realities. There are, first of all, something that I've insisted very much upon years ago also, but I think it's still true. We are facing asymmetries by birth. Certain companies are younger than others. For instance, with a very simple thing, their IT is much younger. A company like Orange, you know, coming from its past as France Télécom and DGT, even before, has probably one of the oldest ITs in the country. So we're spending a lot of money all the time in order to sort out the sort of spaghetti plate that we have in terms of IT applications, and in order to make this really agile and up to date. So we do invest a lot because we have to renew, we have to reinvent a lot of what was invented 20, 25 years ago. And for them, so this is the first asymmetry. In terms of other birth asymmetries, we are regulated. We've been regulated, let's say, ever since the competition started on the French market. So regulation is good when you're a challenger. It helps you, it protects you to some extent. Not always, but it is a way for you to access, first of all, the market, the capacity to access the networks, and then to roll out your own products and compete. I agree with regulation. I live in regulation. I do spend a lot of time with regulators all around the world. But those companies I was mentioning, which are great companies, by the way, I should have said this instantly. Great companies, great products. I've been using their products for forever. I mean, since they appeared. They have invented stuff that we haven't invented. So again, let's give them this credit. They're great companies. But they live in a different world. And I think this is something that will change and that cannot go on forever. I will go back to that point. If spectrum is coal for us as telcos, the data economy is the new oil, and we can tell also that regarding the data issues, and I met someone from the Commission a minute ago, we are facing a legal situation in which our data as telcos is not handled in the same way as data handled by the over-the-tops. We are going, all of us, to be living in the GDPR world in next April or May 2018. But however, if you're a telco, you have the GDPR and you have e-privacy. There's a special regulation just for you guys, because you're a telco, because you run such an important service that it should be regulated twice. So we try to fight against that and to say, why couldn't we live in the same world? Why should we have a special regulation just for us? I think this is something that is not natural and that should be corrected in the future. There are also, and I mentioned the guys, working on the networks. We have thousands of them, for instance, in France and all around the world. We have about 165,000 employees around the world, which is a large number. It's a social asymmetry also. If a customer is looking for us, Orange, let's say in France, you will find Orange. You will find stores, you will find people. All the mayors and the elect people around the country, they find us easily. They find our competitors too, but Orange even more because we are distributed all around the territory. It's more difficult to find someone really from Facebook, from Google, from one of those companies which are a bit more virtual, let's say. And the operators, they do take their social responsibility very seriously. We have a lot of employees. Some of them will go in the future on senior departure plans, but they are replaced to a certain number. We hire at Orange more than 2,000 people per year, which is a large number again. We're always in large numbers. And of course, there is the famous tax asymmetry. I'm not going to be too heavy on that one. It's a very high amount of tax for operators. We have all the taxes that we should pay as a company that has revenues and that has profits, and that's fair, that's okay. But when you're an operator in France, you pay 25% more taxes than any other company. You pay a large list. It's about 10 different taxes, some of them really small, some of them really big. You pay more taxes because you're a telco. What kind of sense does it have, really? I mean, why should it go on forever? We do contribute quite heavily to the funding of the French cinema, which is great, I love the French cinema too, but it's kind of a heavy burden also to contribute to that extent. And sometimes the money we send to the cinema is not entirely used by the cinema. There are some derivations that are produced by the general budget of the state that take some of that money for the general purpose of covering its eternal deficits. And we also pay for the French public television. I don't know if that makes sense. It was created at one point. It's difficult to get rid of it. I mean, it's there, and obviously there is a lack of money also for those players, which have their own sense and that I respect also, but there is no real rationale for us to fund other sectors to that extent. And on the other side, obviously, again, not being too long on that one, but there are tax optimization schemes that all of us know now about and that take advantage of the lack of harmonization of the French and especially the European fiscal system in order to be taking the best of all worlds, not having so many employees, not paying so many taxes, and also moving from one country to another. And again, that's not always illegal. I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm saying that they're playing on the best possibilities given to them, and they were doing optimization by birth also. When they were born, they started optimization because it was something that they could use. And again, for telcos in many countries, it's not possible. Our responsibility and the way we operate and the way we are looked upon by our many, many customers is not the same. Competition law is another asymmetry that I wanted to address, even though, again, this is maybe going to change. The classical concepts of competition law are very usually adding, sales to sales and saying, okay, if you add this company A to company B, they're going to have a huge market share because you're adding A plus B. And we do competition law practices all the time. We do deals also. We've been able at Orange to do an incredibly successful acquisition of Jastel in Spain. We went to phase 2 in front of the Commission, and Mrs. Vestager accepted that this deal went through with remedies that we had to offer. In other situations, for instance, when Facebook acquired WhatsApp, it took them not 6 months or 7 months or 9 months, like for us in the Jastel Spanish case. It took them less than a month to acquire for $13 billion a company because there was no turnover to add to another turnover. There was, there was no income actually on the WhatsApp side at that time. Now I think this is going to change because everybody feels and understands that competition law has to focus on other topics like investment efficiency, and also has to be able to add the capacities that are given to operators by their mastering of algorithms, by their mastering of data profiles. All of this has to be taken into consideration, not just sales and the power that you apparently have on the market because of sales. It is also very obvious that you can have a lot of sales and less income, less benefits. So this is, let's say, a quite primitive concept that had its own virtue, but had been completely overcome by the transformation of all of our markets. So competition has to change its software to some extent. We need a competition law 3.0 now, or 2.0, I don't know, and we need this to change. Again, we are on the map. We live in this world in which we have different perspectives, but we're still on the map, and I think we can thrive in the future also. There is a bright future for telcos. That's, I wanted to say almost, it's the revenge of the new dwarfs, but maybe that's not clear enough. We've been dwarfed to some extent by the new players, but I think we can come back. We are coming back to many extents. Don't say to anyone that I mentioned that we could be dwarfs. You know, obviously it's a bad joke, but don't. I see people making pictures. Please, don't quote me on that. You know, I can't walk back to my company now. But there is a new place for us in this bright new world, and there will be a place for us in the coming, in 30 years on the Forbes chart that we mentioned previously. First of all, because we have great and precious assets. We have a lot of people, and people really, I think, are the first virtue and the first asset that a company has. Everybody says that, even the companies that have very, very few people with them. We have a lot of those people, expertise, know-how, dedication to what they do, and we can build on them. We have networks. I see all the time, and I'm not going to enter into the most day-to-day events and hiccups of our competition, Altice and the others, going through different phases, which can be clumsy and uneasy to certain extents. But what I know is that all our competitors, they want to invest in their networks. Because when you know how to build a network, when you have a network, it's an immense technical knowledge that you have, and it's something that is going to be part of your wealth for a long time. When we invest in FTTH, our business case is a 25 years business case. And I don't know, actually, I'm not as good an engineer as Yves or others around this room, but I don't know what's going to be stronger than light. I think that light seems to be stronger than any other technology in order to transfer information, data, bits to everybody. So it's going to be an asset that we're going to keep for years. Another asset we have is the relationship with millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of customers, actually. We have the boxes in the households. Someone was telling me recently, when you look at the fight on the right side, with the new voice recognition devices that are put in the houses, there is a fight for the living room. It's a very, very strong fight. We want to defend the living room. We want to be there in the future. Others want to be there, because once you're in the middle of the living room, of the kitchen also, you can call, you can ask, you can order, you can do a lot of stuff, and we feel we need to be there, and not only as a box and as an underlying device that is used by others that put services on top of it, but also as a center of the household. And also, obviously, there is the smart diversification. And again, Stéphane Richard and the team, we have launched a process of diversification which builds on our strengths, the network, the people we have, the customers we have, and that adds new dimensions to what we do. Talking about that, banking is the latest addition we've had. We've been bankers to some extent, or movers of money, let's say, in Africa for years now, with a huge success, actually. We have, not billions, but millions of customers and billions of transactions now, and it's growing very, very heavily. And we have launched Orange Bank in France now, maybe in the future on other geographies. It's a good diversification because it builds on the existence. It's not something completely outside of our scope. It builds on the assets. Many operators also give access to music. We are proud shareholders of Deezer. We have helped, I think, Deezer building its position in the world of legal music and streaming. We're selling also new products that will be on the map soon. And at the same time, something that has to be also described is that the OTT players, they're coming back actually in the same galaxy as we are. They start coming back to a world in which we've been for years. I mentioned it a couple of times previously, but the EEC regulation is moving, and I strongly believe it will move to the end in the direction of a pro-investment regulation. The packet that was published 2 years ago, the Project of Telecommunications Code, the Article 74 that addresses the FTTH deployment and the co-funding issues, that goes in the good direction. It says that we want to build a gigabit society, and in order to reach that target, we need companies to invest, and to invest in Europe, and to invest in networks, in the ground, and to roll out those networks. And thus, we will be a more modern Europe. Today, as you know, the investment per head in telcos in Europe is twice inferior to the investment per head in the United States. But again, if you look at the prices of a normal service plan, if you want, in mobile is at least twice higher in the United States. So now, look for the mistake. We've pushed very heavily a pro-consumer regulation in Europe. That's fair enough, but it's done. You know, it took 3 regulations to get, let's say, rid of roaming. We know that. You know, we've seen those revenues decrease and disappear. This is done and over. You know, people can make phone calls in a free roaming way, and probably at one point or another, international phone calls also will be put under the same helm. Okay, that's good. That's for the consumer. That's good. But now let's work on investment in Europe. Let's work on building even stronger players. Let's work on fostering this investment, not hampering it. Let's work on a real Europe in which you can move, and as we do, from one country to another without finding regulations that are profoundly different from one country to another. You know, when we move to Poland, when we move to Slovakia, to Romania, to Spain, each time you have to discover that there's a regulator which, you know, is a bit different from yours, original regulator. There's a consumer law which is a bit different. Taxation is everything is a bit different actually. So no, it's not true. It's not a unified market. So I think Europe has understood this. The Juncker Commission has a stronger industrial strategy vision than any commission before actually. They look at that. It's not a bad word. You don't have to rinse your mouth now after saying industrial strategy in Europe. It's possible. You can say it, you know. And I think that's the recognition that we need it very, very much. The competition law software I was mentioning is changing also. I'm not going to go back on that, but algorithms are integrated in the vision. The French Competition Authority declared recently algorithms can be a form of a new cartel. So that's the integration of those ideas. I'm not saying they are, but they can be. So it's under scrutiny. Everybody knows that Google has been handed a record-breaking fine recently, and others are under scrutiny. The GDPR I mentioned will be applied to everyone. We will try not to have those 2 regulations on data that I mentioned, and the tax asymmetries also. I think there is a momentum now. The recognition is there. Some countries are really much under scrutiny from the other countries, Ireland, Luxembourg to some extent, and it will change. New packets, new proposals have been made by the French president also, Emmanuel Macron, that I think go in the good direction. So to conclude, because I see that I have completely gone beyond the time, but it was fascinating.
But the stage is yours, Pierre.
It was great. No, I mean, I was happy speaking to you at least. Just to conclude very shortly, I want to say that we are not the enemies of the GAFA that I mentioned. We are very, you know, full of respect for what they do. They have invented great stuff. What we're just asking is to be living in the same world, in the same oxygen, live in the same environment. And actually, if I look at rock songs, because I like rock songs very much, so it's another joke that I was trying to make, you know, they will move from higher ground, like Stevie Wonder used to say, to the one world of U2. And in the one world of U2, if you listen to the song really carefully, it's not saying that it's a world in which everybody's just the same. No, the differences are integrated in one world, but it's one world. We breathe the same oxygen. And thus, there will be, for the telcos, a great future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre.